Welcome back again. I'm Corey Lagrange. We're here for week 10 of weekly Emsights. I can't believe I'm saying those words, but we've been in here in quarantine long enough to reach the 10th installment of this ongoing series. And today we've got a good one because the landscape is shifting even more. So today our guest is Haley Cassiopo, Senior Growth Strategist here at Influence. And we're going to be talking a little bit about how you can recession-proof your marketing plan. Haley, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Corey. As Corey pointed out, I'm a senior growth strategist at Influence. I've had about a little over 10 years in the advertising space, worked at a couple different agencies before I came to Influence. And I love working with clients and trying to figure out how to meet their needs or goals. Trying to identify what those goals should be, and B, trying to figure out what the right approach is, or what tests we should put in place to try to figure out a little bit more about the consumer and how to meet the consumer needs.
Awesome. So you've seen quite a few different clients across different industries, I would imagine, in that time, right?
Yes, yep, everything from business to business to B2C, all across the board. I worked with Kellogg's and SAP for a little while I was at VML, and I've also worked with some other local as well. And so, yeah, I've had great experience and been able to look into lots of different vectors, if you will, and take a lot of those learnings with me.
Awesome. That's great. So you guys, everybody tuned in, remember that this session is for you. If you have specific questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that. And if we see any posted there, we'll do our best to address them. But until then, just to sort of set the stage right now, this series is kind of centered around COVID and marketing and advertising specifically. But now we're starting to get into the conversation of a byproduct of COVID, where now, we're almost inevitably going to be seeing ourselves move into a recession. Bloomberg Economics gives those odds about 100% now. So now that conversation is shifting, whereas previously we've been talking a lot about how you overcome the situation of loss in foot traffic or changes in consumer, perspective and habits and all of that good stuff. And while that's still relevant, today we're going to talk a little bit about the back of the house stuff and how we can make sure that our marketing is still effective, and that we can kind of stay the course through a recession, because a lot of this is on the horizon. So anytime we see a recession sort of looming in the future, people start to consider their marketing budget and their advertising budget as low-hanging fruit for shoring up, finances internally. And I'm sure, Haley, you've seen that in the past. Tell us a little bit about your perspective on how people should be approaching their marketing and advertising budgets in a tough economic time like this.
Sure. Yeah, of course. I think, at a very high level, staying proactive. So thinking about, how am I staying aware of my data right now? Am I on top of it? Do I know what's working? Do I know what's not working? Also remembering to stay nimble. Because obviously those conversations could change in a moment's notice. And so having that information proactively in your back pocket can definitely help you be prepared for an impromptu meeting with your other team members, to make sure you can easily defend not only the budget, but also the different channels that you might be leveraging. And then the last thing I would say on that note would be making sure you spend some time testing, because obviously, as you pointed out, this is, we're headed towards recession. I think consumers are behaving even, much differently than they have in the past. So perhaps some of the patterns that we've seen during the customer journey in the past may not be the same now. And so there's a lot to say around, making sure you're still testing to validate that things that you were doing 6 months ago that were working may need to change. You might need to find consumers in a different spot. You might also need to make sure that you're being, I think right now people are definitely spending more time making sure that the brand brands that they're choosing to partner with or leverage, whether that's a B2C or B2B play, are are being sensitive to what's going on during this period with COVID, and making sure that they're finding responsible partners to partner with.
For sure. And that's kind of the beauty of working in digital specifically, right? A lot of the things that make this really tough to navigate is the uncertainty of it. I hate that word. It's been just, that's the buzzword of 2020, right? Uncertainty, uncertain times.
Yeah.
But really, it makes us, more engaged and more able to respond on the fly to changes in consumer behavior and the ability to try new things, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think it all goes back to some of these items are obviously things that you do right out of the gate as a marketer, things like setting up tracking and making sure that you understand what that customer journey looks like. But it's just trying to take the time to make sure that you really understand where those dollars went. Not that we wouldn't be put in a situation like that, like we wouldn't have spent
Mhm.
time to already figure that out. But yeah, I think it's super important to make sure we're aware of how the consumer's responding right now.
Yeah. And the tracking and attribution side, that's tough because, as long as I've been in digital marketing and advertising, attribution and proving ROI and proving return on ad spend has always been one of the top listed challenges for marketers when it comes to people in this space, and it's unfortunate because now more than ever, marketers and advertisers having to defend those budgets, a lot of them are not equipped with the data that they need to make a strong case to be able to keep those budgets and really keep their foot on the gas in a time like this where opportunity and efficiency might arise, or they, like I mentioned, these budgets are usually low hanging fruit for some of the people in the C suite whenever they're evaluating all of the other budgets. It can seem like easy places to make cuts. And if you're not equipped with the data, like your customer acquisition cost and your average lifetime value of a customer, and, then on your digital side, your CPA, your cost per conversion, your conversion rate, all of those things, if you can't draw those clear parallels between those, it gets really hard to defend these budgets, even though we all understand, being from this side, that cutting back at a time like this, there are some opportunities where we can usually shore some things up, maybe focusing a little less on awareness and more on conversion, a little less prospecting, a little more focus on closing and things like that. But it's always been a difficult and unfortunate issue that we have a problem with attribution, and it's not getting any easier. You have any recommendations for people who may not have all the numbers right in front of them but are looking for opportunities or ways that they can paint the story, or create the narrative about the importance of staying the course right now in a time like this?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously we've done a lot of research on our own, but obviously we also look to the experts in the field. So there's a great Forbes article that talks a lot about how evidence shows that people that are investing and stay invested in their marketing actually come out better on the other end of a recession than those that try to, as you pointed out earlier, grab from the low hanging fruit budget of marketing. And so I think that there's lots of signals that tell us that the right thing to do right now is to continue the investment and possibly even increase the investment. I know one of the conversations that we've been having a lot with clients right now is perhaps they have budgets that have been allocated to trade shows or things like that. And so the idea that you again can be nimble and think through, okay, how can I take that budget that's already allocated and make sure that I can tell a good story to the rest of my team about why I
Mhm.
still need these dollars and where I can correctly reallocate them so that we can still see that ROI. I think that's really important. And I do want to circle back, Corey. You made a really good point earlier when talking about the C-suite. I think now is a great time, if you haven't already created a very clear and concise story around how marketing is impacting your bottom line. Now's the time. it's super important to make sure that when you're talking to your team, the C-suite team, whether that's the sales VP or whether that's the CEO of the business, making sure that you can quickly articulate exactly how you see the consumer coming through in different spaces. Obviously, digital is an easy one because you can typically track that path quite a ways. But I think it's really important to make sure that your story is pretty short up so that everybody's on the same page about what success looks like.
Definitely. And that's, I'll get a little in the weeds for just a quick second, just because some interesting conversations that I've been having around not even just tracking what channels are converting when it comes to your marketing and advertising efforts, going into whatever tool you're using, whether it's Google Analytics or some kind of, like suite of communications tools or automation tools. Think about painting the picture for the C-suite or even, especially the sales team from a different attribution model. So, proving value of a channel, we talked about that. That's always difficult, but think about how you can tell the story through the lens of a different attribution model. And when I say that, I mean, we have first touch, we have last touch, we have blended, we have time decay, all of those different things. And usually whenever we're reporting on campaign effectiveness or, things like that, just at a high level, we're looking at last touch attribution. So what channel ultimately drove that sale? What channel ultimately resulted in this e-commerce transaction, right? But maybe look through the lens of first touch and see how that compares to last touch. Because a lot of times, whenever we're having the conversations between marketing and sales, it can be tough to get that full view of the life cycle, like you said, whether it's sales that's initiating the interest and then that person that they've kind of groomed and introduced themselves to ultimately converts through a marketing channel. A lot of times we'll hear salespeople say, yeah, I started the conversation. And then obviously when they went to look for us, they did a search. So that search resulted in a paid search ad. So they clicked through that and then they converted there. And sometimes those are valid statements. They can be. But think about it from the opposite side. Let's talk about it if we're looking at first touch attribution. If it's direct traffic is first touch, then a lot of times that's probably a sales function because people are landing on your site by putting your domain straight in, or they were emailed a link directly through like Gmail or something like that, where it doesn't pass along link attribution, things like that. Like those types of entrances through first touch attribution can kind of help you paint that story. But if you're looking at your first touch attribution and we're saying, hey, look, paid search and social is sending a ton of traffic and converting, if we're looking at first touch attribution, that a lot of times is net new, users who are coming through and who are landing on your site, and it helps make the case for staying the course and not kind of cutting off your funnel at the very top, right? Because if we're cutting off all of these awareness tactics and starting these conversations, then you're really crippling that entire funnel. And it's easy to make the case that, if somebody were to drop off somewhere else, they'd pick it up by another channel. Where, these are some of the stories that we hear from the sales side and the marketing side, or the executive side to the marketing and advertising side. So in a time like this, it helps to not only be empathetic and in the mind of your consumer, but also for the rest of your team that you have to work with and relate to, and all of those different touch points. So I think if you're a marketer who finds yourself struggling to maintain your marketing budget, maybe think about it from across the aisle and think about the story that you need to tell to connect with them from that side, right? Put yourselves in their shoes and think about the way that they see things. The data that they're looking at every day is not the same data that we're looking at every day. And that can kind of help you make a case for retaining those budgets.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that understanding that lay of the land, like you said, Corey, and understanding all the different channels that might have assists throughout that customer journey is really important. And I think, you know, while all channels are extremely important, obviously we're digital focused here. You know, I think that there is definitely a chance that individuals now are going to be a little bit more cautious about their purchases. So before, if we were noticing, let's say 7 to 10 touch points before somebody ended up buying the service or product, I think now you might be looking to that number might increase depending on what that service or product is. If it's not essential, it might be a longer time frame. And so thinking about how do we make sure that we're coming off as you know, a reputable and credible company. So thinking about SEO, making sure that you guys are spending time thinking about how are we showing up in organic search? Do we have the right content for our consumer? Also thinking about email. Obviously, if you already have a connection with these individuals, making sure that you're continuing that conversation is a huge deal. Paid media is great for thinking through that acquisition. And again, I love all the digital channels because it's a lot easier to track that journey and figure out if there are changes, and also to tell a better story to the sales team perhaps and say, hey, you're right, you did have that initial reach out, so that's awesome, and look at how many times it took of you reaching out and the website being ready to receive the consumer and giving them a great relationship, you know, from off the bat. Because if a sales individual says, hey, come to our website, and the website, you know, doesn't deliver on what the consumer is seeking, you're going to have a problem. So you still have to look through that whole
Yep,
journey and make sure you're supporting.
definitely. That's a great point, you know, and taking a look at your messaging also, in addition to the channels that you're looking at a time like this is important to revisit those things too. You know, we kind of talked about, you know, now there may be more opportunity on the paid media side than there was even before. Tell me about some of the factors that are kind of playing into that, because it's something that I've observed too, and I'm interested to hear your side of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's definitely at a time like this, we're going to see some competition dropping out. So now is a good time, you know, when you're having that conversation with your team about, you know, what should we be expecting. I think it's a great time to start making sure that you are setting yourself up for success as different competitors drop out of the race for, you know, CPC or something like that. There was a story I think I pointed out in Forbes earlier, but they were talking specifically about in the 1920s when Post, the cereal brand, they decided to pull back on their media spend and also their marketing spend. And so they dropped theirs during the Great Depression, and that allowed space for Kellogg's to move forward with all their spends, and they continued moving forward, and their profits actually grew. Kellogg's profits grew by 30%, and the company became the category leader during that time of the Great Depression, simply because they stayed the course. They continued forward, while Post, probably like many of us, was unsure about what to do and uncertain about whether, you know, people were really going to be out there buying, and probably wanted to make sure they were holding onto their dollars a little bit more closely. But in looking at that statistic, it makes me feel like that's a perfect example of why we should stay the course and continue down the path of, you know, consumers are still buying, they're still looking around, and we want to show up.
Definitely. And of course, you know, we're not telling anybody out there to spend yourself into debt, you know, just for the sake of maintaining your marketing budget. But if you've got the capital and the fluid, you know, the fluidity to be able to stay invested in this, you know, what you're saying, and historically has happened, we see it surfacing, you know, frequently now. I love paid search because it's such a dynamic and live moving channel for advertising, where you can see things happen and take shape and evolve, you know, almost on the day-to-day basis. And it's been interesting to see that for a lot of our clients, as competition falls off, we see, you know, of course, there's always going to be somebody. Look, you've got 4 opportunities to advertise on the front page of search, right? one of those top competitors drops off, somebody's going to fill up that gap. But we're seeing some of these industry leading competitors start to drop off and smaller challengers start to rise up and fill that fourth spot. But it allows us as reputable marketers to bank on that narrative and that story of trustworthiness and industry leadership and things like that, to where we're even able to get, to gain more share of voice and start to show up more frequently and bank on being reputable and that recognizable name that's there for people in times that are tough. So keeping your foot on the gas gives you the opportunity to gain share of voice, gain perception that you're, sort of this rock in tumultuous times, and lets you kind of keep telling your story. And like you mentioned, you pair that with the fact that cost per click and cost per conversion are down right now. It not only helps you succeed because competition is slimmer, it lets every dollar that you invest into it go so much farther because your clicks are getting cheaper, your impressions are getting cheaper in a lot of these industry verticals. So it's really a great time to be a savvy marketer because there's a lot of opportunity to continue to tell your story. And like you said, consumers haven't stopped buying. The way that they're doing it is just changing a little bit. So we have a client that I really love working with because they understand the concept of feeding a channel until it starts to see diminishing returns. So we'll set a target return on ad spend or a target ROI. And until we see that that channel is starting to diminish and what it's giving back, like if we can feed and get a 6x ROI or 6x return on ad spend on a channel, and we've got the capital to put into it, let's keep feeding that and keep gaining that market share as long as the margins allow it, right? So it's times like this that we need to be having these conversations with the sales side and the executives to know what tolerance we have, what acquisition costs we can bear, so we can really feed the business in times like this. It helps to build dependable cash flow. It helps to kind of keep things going where seasonality might be trending down. It's definitely an interesting time to take a look at this objectively and say, look, external factors are what they're going to be. Let's get down to the nuts and bolts of the numbers that we need to hit and approach this from a very sound and technical place, so we can continue these types of things, right? And I know that can be easier said than done because I'm back here on the strategy side, but you're the one that really has to talk to the clients face to face and explain these kinds of things to them. Do you have any tips for people when they're approaching these hard conversations on ways that they can connect better and maybe put this story together to be able to make the case for these kinds of things?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we've said a lot about defending your budget, but at the end of the day, these are your teammates, right? Everybody wants your company to be successful. So I think taking the approach of, hey, you know what? I might be the director of marketing, I might be the, chief marketing officer, but that doesn't mean that I have all the answers. It means that I'm going to try just as hard to talk through the path and the patterns that we're seeing with our consumers so that we can better meet them where they are. And if they have changing needs, then let's pay attention. And so I guess my advice would be, I always recommend having a monthly meeting if you can, to talk through the actual leads that came through, whether that's closed deals or whether that's people that came to the website, and then talking to the sales team about how did those conversations go? Are there opportunities for optimization in that process, right? So did the person fill out something to join a webinar, or did they download a white paper? Is this the right time for the sales team to reach out? What are the next steps? And having those real conversations authentically without feeling like you have to defend yourself would open that culture up, I think, for both teams to not feel defensive. Because I know I've been on the marketing side and on the sales side of these conversations, and I can say that as long as everybody's going in with with their heart in the right place and saying, hey, that's a great question, I'm happy to look that up, and not going in defensive, I think we come out of that a lot better than when we go in feeling like we're going to be in the hot seat and having to defend our budget. So I think whether you're in sales or marketing, I think the idea of going in and just saying, hey, we don't know what's going to happen next. The best we can do is looking at the daily data that's coming in and the real-time conversations that the sales team's having. They have real data that you probably need as a marketer.
Yep.
And so if you're not having those real conversations, if you're only looking in CRM and not getting some of the feedback around how people are behaving, or, you know, maybe people right now are expecting us to be a little more compassionate, right? So maybe having somebody push on, you know, too hard on the sales side of things might push them away. And so those are the types of things we need to be paying attention to. People right now, I think, are a little bit more sensitive than they have been in the past. Heck, I mean, we're all at home with our kids, most of us at least, and you know, we need a little bit of grace for one another to be, you know, considering we're all in our home bases and everything. So I think, you know, making sure we're authentic and compassionate to our other team players is the right approach there.
Very true. Yeah, we talk about the voice of the consumer, but think about the voice of the coworker also, right? You know, in these tough times, we're not seeing people face to face like we were in the past. You know, we have to, you know, maybe double down on some of these soft skills that, you know, are so important whenever you're working in close proximity to people. Keep in mind that, you know, Haley, even though I haven't seen you face to face in months, you know, we have to remember those things, like I know how to connect with you, you know, and present things in the right way. You know, I know the facts I need to give you, the conversations we need to have, and the same way that we know our consumers, we have to know the rest of the team also. We had a question in the chat. So all of the things that you just said about approaches for making those connections and defending the budget, does that change at all when we're talking about a small business and maybe not somebody we would typically call a brand or a major brand? If we're talking about smaller companies, maybe mom and pop, maybe small to mid-size, does that really change, in your opinion, the approach that we take?
You know, I think it probably goes back to, you know, making sure we're nimble. I mean, I think that the reality is looking at the data stays the same. Having a good and authentic understanding of, you know, your teammates is just as important, if not more important, on a smaller team. I think that some of these smaller businesses probably have an opportunity to be more nimble than the larger corporations. So I think now is a perfect time for them to shine. You know, if as you pointed out, Corey, when we think about some of the bigger brands maybe pulling back on their budgets and allowing some opportunities for some of these smaller businesses, I think now is the time to double down on our authentic selves and our authentic brands and truly present the type of companies that we are. I think that it's not going to cut it anymore to just be a run-of-the-mill company delivering run-of-the-mill products. I think at this point in time, based on all of the things that are going on, people want people that they can connect with. And so I think it's more important now than ever to show faces of the individuals that are working for your company and making sure that people have an opportunity to really meet them and get to know them. I think it's going to be less transactional and more relational as we move forward. And that might be easier for some
Love
of the
that.
smaller businesses.
It's true. You know, there's less red tape. There's less, you know, kind of chain of command to worry about in times, you know, in organizations like that. So you're right, that human connection is even more important, and you could probably leverage that and work that angle too. You know, we have to remember that at the end of the day, we're all people communicating with other people, right? So that's a really good point. Regardless, just to be authentic, let your guard down a little bit, maybe. But yeah, all great stuff. Haley, thank you so much. We're coming up on time. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with people, whether it's about this topic specifically, or, you know, recommendations that you have or things to keep in mind?
Sure. I mean, I think, and I did see another comment in the chat just related to what if you're not the internal marketing person, but you're kind of an agency or a partner talking to a team. And I think, all of what we've talked about still stands. I mean, I think we should be pushing for our partners or companies that we work with to show their authentic selves. And honestly, we're probably all going to have to push ourselves a little bit out of our comfort zone. So if we're working with teams that are not used to telling their personal stories or showcasing their employees, or even responding empathetically to people that are having a hard time right now, right? I mean, we've got a bunch of people that are worried. I mean, just a community of individuals worried about, their jobs, and worried about paychecks, and worried about whether schools are going to be open, and whether what the next year is going to hold for us in light of COVID. And I think just showing a little bit of grace, checking in with those clients that we have, or customers or partners, and just asking how they are and seeing if there's something we can do for them, keeping in touch, and just being slightly more authentic than we've even been in the past, just to prove that we really are here to be good partners, because I think that's what's going to keep people afloat in these coming months.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Haley. And I know you talk a little bit more about all of those different topics that you just hit on in the white paper that we actually put out not too long ago about recession-proofing your marketing plan. So if you want to hear more from Haley and the other members of our leadership team, we've actually pulled together a white paper that kind of builds upon some of these points that we've talked about, that we'll be distributing via email and broadcasting on our different social platforms and things like that. Haley, thanks again. I really appreciate you being here and giving kind of the other side of the perspective on this. I'm sure everybody gets tired of hearing me ramble about data alone. So it's always awesome to get somebody, from the relationship side and to kind of temper my data edge. So I appreciate that. I'm sure everybody else does too.
Thanks, Corey. I was glad to join you today.
Awesome. So guys, like I said, if you want to hear more from Haley, we actually have, a number of different content pieces coming out, and you can sign up to make sure that you're always in the loop via email by visiting the link that you see on the screen, more.influence.com/subscriptions. And we also want to let you guys know that we are still doing our 30-minute marketing therapy sessions. If you have a burning issue or a question that you need answered when it comes to marketing, advertising, communications, you can actually schedule a 30-minute session with a member of the Influence team, where we could sit down for 30 minutes and have a conversation and kind of talk through your primary issue with no strings attached, no commitment on your side. We're just really here to help our community, because we know that at the end of the day, the better we all come out from this situation, the better we'll all be. So you can send an email to expert@influence.com and we'll get that scheduled. We'll actually be taking a break from weekly Emsights next week with the 4th of July holiday and the long weekend and things like that. We'll be picking up the week after that with a topic that I'm really excited about how where we work impacts marketing strategy. Being on the strategic side, I know it's tough. We can't get in the same room with the team and with clients and give them the razzle dazzle presentation. So, we'll be talking about how the current situation impacts the strategic approach that we take when it comes to marketing and advertising. So again, lots of ways you can reach out. We're thankful for you guys being here. Haley, thanks again to you. And again, not next week, but the week after, we'll see you again. Talk to you all soon.
Thanks, Corey.